My ex-husband married his dream woman just days after our divorce. Then I saw her face, and everything I thought I knew shattered. At first, I thought it was just a cruel coincidence. The timing, the photo he sent, the smug tone of his voice when he called me just to gloat. But when I looked at the woman he married, I realized something far more disturbing. She wasn't just beautiful, she was reconstructed. From nose to chin to smile, I recognized those eyes even after all these years, because once they belonged to a girl we both knew, the one he used to call forgettable in high school, a girl I hadn't seen since senior year. That's when the puzzle clicked into place. He didn't fall in love with someone new, he fell for an illusion. And in doing so, he finally revealed the truth about who he really was and who he'd always been. Derek and I didn't fall in love overnight. It was a slow build, the kind that sneaks up on you when you're too busy surviving to notice. We met at a continuing education class on financial literacy. I'd enrolled because I wanted to move up at work. He'd come on a whim, trying to get his life back on track after a messy breakup and a failed real estate exam. He was the kind of man who didn't try too hard to impress, a little rough around the edges, wore the same leather boots every week, always slightly scuffed, but he had this dry, deadpan humor that made even the most boring topics bearable. We started sitting next to each other out of habit. He brought me coffee once after noticing I always looked exhausted. That gesture, small and unpolished, cracked something open in me. Our friendship turned into something else, gradually. Late-night phone calls about job stress, grocery runs that ended with ice cream and long drives. When he finally kissed me, it wasn't fireworks. It was quiet and certain, like two puzzle pieces snapping into place. We moved in together after a year. The apartment was tiny, but it felt like ours. I still remember how proud we were the first time we bought furniture that wasn't secondhand. Derek put the bookshelf together upside down, and I didn't have the heart to fix it. We laughed about it for days. Our wedding was modest, just family and a few close friends at a botanical garden outside Denver. I wore a pale blue dress, and he cried when I walked down the aisle. I remember thinking, this is it. This is safe. This is home. I gave that marriage everything I had. I worked full-time as an accounting assistant, budgeting every cent so we could afford the things he wanted: a better car, nicer suits for work, and dinners with potential clients. I didn't mind. I believed in him. I believed in us. When his mother got sick, I drove 4 hours every weekend so Derek could spend time with her. I brought food, handled errands, and even helped coordinate her care. Derek told me once that I was his anchor. I wore that title like a badge of honor. We wanted kids, or at least I did. After 2 years of trying and one quiet consultation with a fertility specialist, I was told the odds weren't in our favor. Derek didn't say much. He just kissed the top of my head and said, "Maybe it's for the best." I cried that night while folding laundry, quietly so he wouldn't hear. I threw myself into building a life worth staying for. I decorated our apartment with soft light and plants. I left him encouraging notes in his coat pocket. I made elaborate dinners even on weeknights just to create a sense of occasion. He used to smile at those things. But gradually his smiles faded. He stopped noticing. Or maybe he just stopped caring. I held on. I told myself every marriage had quiet phases, that we were just tired, that love, real love, wasn't supposed to be exciting all the time. It was supposed to be steady, dependable, and I was proud to be that for him. I didn't realize I was mistaking silence for stability. What we had wasn't love growing old, it was love growing distant. And I was the only one still reaching across the widening gap. Even as things began to feel off, I refused to believe we were drifting. I clung to every shared meal, every quiet weekend, trying to convince myself that the foundation was still there. I planned our 8th anniversary weeks in advance. Booked a reservation at the restaurant where he first told me he loved me and bought him a leather wallet engraved with his initials. He canceled the day before, claiming work had sent him out of town. I told myself it was fine, these things happen. But deep down, I'd already started to feel it, the shift. The distance between us wasn't measured in arguments or slammed doors. It was in the silence. The way he stopped reaching for my hand when we watched TV. The way he looked at his phone more than he looked at me. Still, I held on, I adjusted, I tried harder, because I believed in the vows we made, in sickness and in health, in distance and in doubt. I kept showing up for a man who had already checked out. And that's the cruelest part of love sometimes. You don't realize you're the only one still fighting until there's nothing left to save. It's strange how distance creeps in without warning. One day you're laughing together over burnt pancakes, and the next, your words bounce off walls that didn't used to be there. I started noticing it in the smallest ways. Derek used to kiss my forehead every morning before leaving for work. Then he started skipping it. At first I thought he was just running late, but days turned into weeks. I mentioned it casually once. He just shrugged. "You're not 5, he said, grabbing his keys. He stopped replying to my texts during the day. I'd send little updates, funny things from work, reminders, even memes I knew he'd laugh at. Most of them went unread. When I brought it up, he said he was slammed and that I needed to stop checking in like a babysitter. He came home later and later, no explanation, no apology. I'd wait with dinner warm in the oven, lights dimmed, and wine breathing on the counter. Most nights he walked in smelling faintly of cologne, that wasn't his usual kind, and said he already ate. The first time it really stung was our anniversary, June 14th. I took a half day off work and spent hours cooking his favorite meal. Braised short ribs, roasted garlic mashed potatoes, sautéed asparagus. I even baked a chocolate tart from scratch. I cleaned the apartment from top to bottom, lit candles, and put on the dress he once said made me look like a poem. By 7 p.m., the food was ready. By 8, the candles had burned halfway down. By 9, I was still alone, my phone silent. At 10:12 p.m., I got a short email. "Client meeting ran late, crashing at the office. Rain check?" No apology, no happy anniversary, just dismissal. I sat at the table staring at the untouched meal. The silence was deafening. That was the first night I didn't clean up. I just turned off the lights and went to bed in the dress, makeup still on, staring at the ceiling. The next morning, I told myself not to overreact. Maybe it really was work. But work became his excuse for everything. When my aunt passed away and I asked him to come with me to the funeral, he claimed he couldn't get coverage. When I hurt my back moving storage boxes, he told me to call a neighbor because he was slammed with deadlines. Derek was physically present, but emotionally, he'd checked out months ago. On Friday, I accidentally found a receipt in his jacket pocket, a wine bar across town, 2 glasses of wine, a cheese plate, the timestamp, our anniversary night. I didn't confront him. Something inside me froze that day. From then on, I started watching him instead of reaching for him, listening for patterns. His phone, once left carelessly around the apartment, was now always face down, password changed. His gym bag carried cologne, a clean dress shirt, and gum. He claimed he was networking more. There were moments when I tried to reach him. I'd ask if we could plan a weekend away, just the two of us. He'd brush it off. "We're not teenagers, Rachel. We don't need to escape every 5 minutes." Eventually, I stopped asking. And then came the week that changed everything. He left for work Monday morning as usual, but by Friday I still hadn't heard a word, no texts, no calls. I tried reaching him, nothing, so I called his office. That's when I found out Derek had resigned 3 days earlier. No forwarding number, no explanation. I stood in my work hallway holding the phone, my whole body trembling. He was already gone, he just never told me. At night, I sat on our bed for hours, replaying every moment from the last few months. How long had he been planning this? How many lies had I accepted simply because I didn't want to face the truth? I walked through our apartment like a stranger. The place still smelled like the sandalwood diffuser I kept near the window. His slippers were still by the door, but his presence had vanished long before his body did. By Saturday morning, I noticed more things missing. His brown leather shoes, the ones he wore to important meetings, his favorite shaving kit, a couple of dress shirts I never saw him wear. And then, on the desk, I found a thin folder. Inside, divorce papers. No explanation, no conversation, just his signature and a note, it's time. I didn't scream, I didn't cry. I just stood there, holding those papers, wondering how love could go from forever to formality in a matter of months. The day Derek walked out wasn't the day he left me. He had been leaving me in pieces for months. But the moment he physically stood in our apartment, suitcase half packed, was when I finally saw him for who he had become. He came home unexpectedly that Sunday afternoon, unlocking the door like it was still his. I was in the kitchen heating up leftovers, my hair pulled into a messy bun, still wearing the oversized sweatshirt he once said he loved on me. When I turned and saw him standing there, I felt every organ in my body brace. "I'm just grabbing the rest of my things," he said, not even looking up. His voice was cold, distant. I followed him to the bedroom. There was a duffel bag on the bed, already half full, with button-down shirts and shoes I didn't recognize, new, expensive, nothing like the Derek who used to agonize over buying even a discounted blazer. "You quit your job without telling me?" I said slowly. "You disappeared for a week, and now this?" He finally looked at me. "Rachel, let's not make this harder than it needs to be." I blinked. "Harder than what? Are you leaving without a word? Me finding divorce papers like junk mail?" He sighed like I was exhausting him. We both knew this wasn't working. "No," I said, my voice shaking. "You knew. You decided I was just collateral." He picked up the duffel and zipped it closed. "I've accepted a position in Santa Fe, executive VP. It's a better opportunity, more aligned with what I want." "Since when?" I asked. "Since a few months ago. I've been seeing someone, her family owns the firm. She helped me get the job." I took a step back like he'd hit me. "You've been cheating on me." "I didn't say that," he said quickly, "but yes, we're together now." I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. "You don't even feel guilty?" I whispered. He finally hesitated. "You stopped being a partner a long time ago, Rachel. You buried yourself in routines. You stopped being fun. You were always tired or organizing something as keeping our life from falling apart." "I didn't ask you to." Silence fell like glass shattering between us. And then he said it. The words that shattered me completely. "She's pregnant, 3 months." Everything stopped. My heart, my breath, time itself. "I wanted to tell you after everything was finalized. It's better this way." I nodded slowly. "So this was all just preparation. Leaving me wasn't an accident. It was a strategy." He didn't deny it. I didn't cry in front of him. I didn't give him that. I just stood still as he walked out of the apartment, duffel slung over his shoulder, like he was heading to the gym. After the door closed, I slid down to the floor, the papers still clutched in one hand. Divorce, pregnancy, another woman, a new life. It was a closed chapter he didn't even bother rereading. I stayed on that floor until night fell. The apartment lights stayed off. My phone buzzed once, probably Lauren checking in. But I didn't move. I couldn't. It was as if my body needed to catch up with what had happened. I kept replaying his words. "You stopped being fun." As if love was some performance I failed to deliver. As if routine and exhaustion weren't the things we both built and lived in. He wanted a life without the weight, and I had become that weight. 2 days later, I got a notification, an email from Derek. Subject line, proof. I opened it, expecting legal documents, but instead there it was, his new marriage certificate, and below it, a wedding photo. Derek in a sharp navy suit, smiling wider than I'd seen in years. The bride, Brittany Monroe, was beautiful. Long blonde waves, porcelain skin, and eyes that seemed almost glassy with perfection. I stared, blinking slowly. The name tugged something loose in my memory. I opened Facebook and searched. Her profile popped up instantly. I scrolled through photos, art galleries, charity events, spa selfies. Then I saw a photo from 10 years ago, buried deep in the tagged images. My stomach turned. Brittany Monroe used to be Brittany Sanders. We went to high school together. She was quiet and shy, always hiding her face. Back then, her skin was blotchy, her teeth slightly crooked, her nose wide. People weren't kind. I wasn't cruel, but I wasn't her friend either. Derek used to laugh at the way she walked. He once called her a ghost nobody remembers. And now he'd married her, or at least a version of her. She had completely transformed. Surgery, clearly. Face reshaped. Teeth corrected. Body refined. She looked like she'd been built, not born. I called Lauren that night. Do you remember Brittany Sanders? There was a pause. Then Lauren said, "Oh God, is she the one he married?" You knew? She was always obsessed with him in school. I heard she got work done in New York. The whole face, Rach. Chin, eyes, jaw, everything. And now she's loaded, family real estate money. So that's what it had been. Not just betrayal, but strategy. Derek didn't fall in love. He upgraded. And I was the outdated model. I didn't sleep that night. I lay in bed thinking about how much I'd given to that man. 8 years of groceries, birthdays, funerals, missed promotions, and folded laundry, all traded for someone with newer parts. But the pain wasn't about her beauty. It was that he never even tried to talk to me, never gave us a chance. He saw a shinier option and left, like I was a used coat he didn't want anymore. He married her the day after our divorce was finalized. He didn't even wait a week. In the weeks that followed, I stopped recognizing myself. The apartment, once my sanctuary, became a mausoleum. Everything reminded me of a life I had built for two, now echoing with only one set of footsteps. I kept bumping into invisible ghosts, his coffee mug on the shelf, his cologne faint on the towel rack, the indentation on his side of the bed that hadn't quite fluffed back up. I didn't cry often, not because I wasn't in pain, I was. But the grief came in strange forms, forgetting to eat, staring at the ceiling for hours, scrolling through social media until my eyes burned, then deleting every app out of impulse. I wore the same sweatshirt 3 days in a row. I didn't return my mother's calls. I avoided mirrors. And yet, I still showed up to work, still smiled when the receptionist said, "Rough week," still said, "Fine," when coworkers asked how I was doing. Inside, I was unraveling. I kept wondering what I'd done wrong. Was I too boring, too responsible, not spontaneous enough? Had I lost him because I'd tried too hard, or not enough? Was loving quietly the wrong way to love? I began to inventory every moment, every choice, as if tracing my steps back might undo the damage. Then came the night I couldn't sleep. Again. And went looking for something to distract myself. I ended up in the back of the closet digging through a box labeled old stuff. High school yearbooks, college essays, birthday cards. At the bottom, I found our wedding vows, written in Derek's handwriting. I read them over and over until the words blurred. I promise to never forget how lucky I am to love you. Lies, now, empty ink. I placed the letter back in the box and closed it. That weekend, an email popped up, a high school reunion invite. At first, I scoffed. The idea of smiling in a room full of people I hadn't seen in 15 years sounded unbearable. But something inside me, something stubborn and flickering, told me to go. I didn't want to see anyone. I just didn't want to disappear. So I RSVP'd yes. On the day of the reunion, I almost bailed 3 times, but I forced myself into a black dress, swiped on some lipstick, and drove. Not to impress anyone, just to prove to myself I could still stand upright. The event was at a brewery downtown, buzzing with music and clinking glasses, familiar faces. Older, rounder, some grayer, but still familiar. I felt 100 eyes glance my way, some with polite curiosity, others with whispers trailing behind. And then, from the far corner of the room, I heard a voice. Rachel? I turned. It was Matt Dawson, the boy who used to lend me his pencil in math class, the one who played bass in our failed high school band. He smiled, genuine and warm. I almost didn't recognize you. We talked. Not about Derek, not about betrayal, just about music, jobs, aging, and life. He told me about his daughter, about his divorce, about how he spends Saturdays painting, even though he's awful at it. And I laughed, really laughed, for the first time in months. When I drove home that night, I rolled the window down, let the wind tangle my hair. The grief wasn't gone, but for the first time, I felt something else alongside it, something small but real, in a sense that maybe I hadn't disappeared after all. The next morning, I got up early, not for work, not for errands, but because I wanted to. I made coffee and stood on the balcony, wrapped in a blanket, watching the sun stretch over the rooftops. It felt like breathing for the first time in weeks. I started doing little things, not for anyone else, but for me. I replaced the bed sheets. I rearranged the bookshelf. I threw out the expired condiments in the fridge and bought fresh herbs. The apartment didn't feel like ours anymore. It was starting to feel like mine. Matt and I started texting occasionally. Nothing romantic, just a human connection. A meme here, a song recommendation, and I hope your Monday sucks less than mine. And it helped. It reminded me I was still seen. I wasn't healed. I wasn't even okay. But I was beginning to understand something vital, that Derek leaving wasn't a reflection of my inadequacy. It was a reflection of his emptiness, of how easily he could discard something real for something shiny. He didn't break me, he revealed me. And maybe, just maybe, that version of me, quiet, bruised, resilient, was still worth showing up for. Healing wasn't a straight line. It didn't come in the form of inspirational quotes or spa days. It came in quiet, gritty, almost invisible steps, like remembering to eat breakfast or finally tossing out the box of wedding photos I kept pretending I'd go through. One morning in early spring, I woke up and realized I hadn't thought about Derek in 2 full days, not once. The realization startled me more than any of the heartbreaks before. I made coffee and sat by the window, letting that silence settle into something that felt like peace. A week later, I took a bold step. I cut my hair. It sounds small, maybe even cliche, but that haircut marked the first decision I made entirely for myself in years. I walked into the salon with long, cautious waves and walked out with a blunt, shoulder-length bob. That made me feel, for lack of a better word, sharp. Matt noticed. We had started meeting every couple of weeks, sometimes for lunch, sometimes just a walk in the park. There were no expectations between us, and that was what I needed most. He never asked too many questions. He never tried to fix me. He simply showed up. One Saturday, we sat on a bench overlooking the river, drinking cheap coffee from a cart. The air smelled like early summer, cut grass and sunscreen. I remember looking at him and realizing I didn't feel broken in front of him. I just felt like me. That same week, I signed up for an evening art class, not because I was good at painting. I wasn't, but I wanted to use my hands for something that wasn't typing or folding. The first time I smeared color across a blank canvas, I felt a pressure lift from my chest that I hadn't even realized was there. In that room, I wasn't a wife or an ex-wife. I wasn't defined by what had been taken from me. I was simply a woman making something new. My weekends began to fill up not with obligations, but with simple joys. farmers market strolls, mornings in the bookstore, coffee with Lauren, who never once said, "I told you so," even though she probably could have. She just listened. That was more healing than advice ever could be. One afternoon, while cleaning out the last drawer of our old shared desk, I found something that made me pause. A graduation photo of Derek. One I'd never seen. In it, he looked entirely different. Younger, acne-scarred, braces visible, his smile more self-conscious than confident. I stared at it for a long time. The man he'd become, the one who valued image over honesty, was light years away from the boy in that photo. I didn't feel pity or anger, I just felt distance. And that, in itself, was freedom. I tucked the photo in an envelope and sealed it, then I labeled the box, "Donate." I wasn't erasing the past, I was letting it rest. That night, I sat on the balcony of my new apartment, a small but sunlit one-bedroom overlooking a row of blooming crabapple trees, and felt something settle inside me. It wasn't joy, not yet, but it was something quieter, a sense of ownership, of space that was mine, entirely mine. I started journaling again. Nothing profound, just scattered thoughts, dreams, grocery lists that turned into little confessions. I wrote things I hadn't dared say out loud, that I sometimes still checked his social media, even though I knew it would hurt. I wondered if Brittany ever looked at their child and saw echoes of a face she paid to forget. And then one day I didn't check, not out of discipline, but because I forgot. Time did what it always does. It softened the sharpest edges and sanded down the rage. What remained wasn't bitterness. It was clarity and a strange, fierce protectiveness over the woman I had become. Matt and I kept walking that tightrope between friendship and something more. He never rushed, he never pushed, he was just there. And one evening as we left a local concert, his hand brushed mine. I didn't pull away. It wasn't the beginning of a new love story, not yet, but it was proof that I was still capable of connection, of trust, of letting someone near without flinching. That was enough. For the first time in a long time, I wasn't waiting for closure, I was creating a continuation. Healing didn't announce itself with fireworks. It whispered in the background, through clean dishes, through returned texts, through mornings when I woke up without dread in my chest. It wasn't fast, it wasn't easy, but it was mine. And that made all the difference. It had been nearly a year since I'd last heard Derek's voice. I was folding laundry when the screen of my phone lit up with a number I didn't recognize. I let it ring, let it go to voicemail. But seconds later, it lit up again. And again. Something in me knew. I answered on the third call. "Rachel," he said, voice tight, "I need to talk to you." There was a long silence. I said nothing, let him squirm. "It's about Brittany," he finally continued. "She gave birth a few weeks ago." I leaned against the counter, my heart calm. "Congratulations," I said coolly. "She won't hold the baby," he blurted. That got my attention. "Excuse me?" She says the baby doesn't look like her. Or me, she's convinced something's wrong. "And you?" I thought maybe, "You knew something. You laughed when I told you about her. You looked like you knew something." I smiled. I did. He went silent. I walked to my bookshelf and pulled out an old high school yearbook, flipped it open to the photo I'd bookmarked. "You remember this?" I said into the phone. He didn't reply. Page 63. "Your senior portrait, crooked teeth, squinty eyes, acne, ring a bell?" His voice dropped. "Where did you get that?" "It was on your desk, the same drawer you told me never to touch. I found it while packing up what you left behind." He inhaled sharply. "And Brittany," I continued. "She used to be Brittany Sanders, remember? You called her fish face in 10th grade. She had a nose job, chin sculpting, and eye lift. Rewrote her entire face." "How are you saying?" "I'm saying," I said calmly, "you and your wife erased your pasts, and now you're surprised your child didn't get the memo." Silence. "I did a DNA test," he said. "She's mine, but she looks like the old me." "There it is," I whispered. "The shame you thought you buried, It's in your daughter's face. And Brittany, she sees the girl she spent thousands to erase. You don't get it, he said, voice rising. She's refusing to feed her. I have to do everything. Her mother steps in. Brittany cries every time she looks at her. And what do you want from me, Derek? He paused. I don't know. Advice. Understanding. You want to understand from the woman you discarded like expired milk? That's not fair. You know what's not fair? I said, voice steel now. An innocent baby being rejected because her parents were too ashamed of their former selves to parent who she really is. You think I'm a monster. Think you're a coward. There was a long pause, then I shouldn't have called. No, you shouldn't have, I agreed. I hung up. Then I blocked the number. No tears, no shaking, just a clean, sharp ending. That evening, I sat on my balcony with a glass of wine, watching the sun melt into the horizon. The conversation replayed in my head, but instead of pain, I felt clarity, the kind of clarity you earn, not stumble into. Derek had wanted a life of image. He'd built a glass castle on illusions, new titles, new faces, new family, and now it was cracking under the weight of truth. 3 days later, Lauren sent me a message. You need to see this. Attached was a blurry screenshot of a parenting forum post. New mom here, struggling. My husband is withdrawing, and I don't feel connected to my baby. She doesn't look like me. I cry every time I see her. Help. The username, an alias I recognized, Brittany. I didn't feel satisfaction. I felt sadness. For the baby, yes, but also for Brittany. She had climbed so high, trying to escape who she was, only to find that motherhood brings you back to the rawest version of yourself. And if you hate that version, how do you love your child? Later that week, I ran into an old coworker of Derek's at the grocery store. He didn't know we'd divorced. When I told him, he whistled Man, he's spiraling. Left the company under strange circumstances. Heard he had an affair with someone in his wife's firm. Again! I nodded, unsurprised. Patterns repeat. People don't change unless they choose to. He looked at me curiously. You doing okay, though? You look good, like better than ever. And I smiled, 'cause it was true. I had no revenge plan, no desire to get even. I didn't need to. My life, quiet, authentic, whole, was the loudest response. I was never the boring one. I was never the mistake. I was the mirror he couldn't face. A month later, I attended a small networking event through my new job. It was nothing fancy, just wine, soft jazz, and a rooftop view. But when I walked in, confident in a midnight blue dress I'd once thought too bold for me, I caught my reflection in the glass doors. And for the first time, I didn't see a woman recovering. I saw a woman return. Someone tapped my shoulder. It was Matt, freshly shaven, tie loosened, smiling like he'd found something worth looking at. You look radiant, he said simply. I smiled back, I am. Derek had called looking for answers, but the truth is, he'd already heard it in my silence, in my goodbye, in the life I rebuilt without ever once needing him. Again. That was my revenge, and it was beautiful. It's funny how much space a person can take up in your life, and how much bigger that space feels once they're gone. Not emptier, just wider. That's what the aftermath felt like, not a crater, but a clearing. I began to fill that space with things that truly belonged to me. Saturday mornings wrapped in a fleece robe, black coffee, and Billie Holiday on vinyl. Long walks through the park. A sketchbook was always in my bag, though most of the pages were still blank. I wasn't chasing closure anymore, I had it. But what came next wasn't revenge or even triumph. It was peace. I met Matt for lunch one Sunday, just as summer was beginning to fade into September. We sat on the patio of a quiet cafe, a soft breeze ruffling napkins and hair. The conversation was easy. He told me about a project at work he was excited about, I told him about a short story I was finally writing. "You seem lighter," he said. "I feel lighter," I admitted. We were quiet for a moment. Not awkward silence, just the kind that happens when two people don't need to fill every gap. Then he reached for his iced tea, hesitated, and looked at me. "I've been thinking," he said. "I know we've taken things slow. I know you weren't ready. But if you ever are, I'd like to take you out. Officially." I didn't answer right away. I looked at him, really looked at him. The lines at the corners of his eyes, the way he watched me, not with expectation, but with hope. "I'm not sure what I want yet," I said honestly. "That's okay," he replied with a small smile. "I can wait. Or not wait. I just Ruipu like being in your life." It was the most generous offer I'd received in years. No pressure, no conditions, just presence. And for the first time, I considered what it would mean to let someone in again. Not to fix me, not to fill a void, but to walk beside me step by step. Later that week, I invited Matt to an art exhibit downtown. It was nothing extravagant. Local artists, some watercolor landscapes, and a few bold abstracts. But we stayed for hours, drifting from piece to piece, speaking in soft tones that felt more intimate than shouting declaration. At one point, we stood in front of a painting, just 3 swipes of color on a canvas, blue, black, gold. "I don't know why," I said, "but I love this one." Matt tilted his head. "It's unfinished, or feels like it." "Exactly." He smiled. "Maybe that's the point." That night, he walked me home, hands brushing again like they had months ago. But this time I didn't wait. I took his hand, fingers lacing with his naturally, like we'd done it 100 times before. He didn't say anything, he just squeezed gently. By winter, we weren't defining things. We didn't need to. We moved like two people who'd learned to live without illusions. There were no promises of forever, just dinners shared, stories swapped, quiet laughter that didn't echo off old wounds. Sometimes I'd catch my reflection in a shop window and not recognize the woman staring back. She looked grounded, curious, even a little playful. I liked her. One afternoon, while journaling at a cafe, I wrote down something that surprised me. Maybe love doesn't have to be dramatic to be real. Maybe it just has to be honest. And that was enough for me. I wasn't the same Rachel who had spent years waiting by the door hoping someone would come home. Now I was the Rachel who opened her own door, who lit her own candles, who finally loved the life she had created, not for what it looked like, but for how it felt. Love didn't roar back into my life, it whispered. And in those whispers, I found something even deeper than passion: respect, safety, a shared rhythm. I don't know what the future holds. I don't need to. All I know is this: I'm not afraid anymore. Of starting over, of being alone, of being loved for who I really am. And that, more than anything, is the life I was always meant to live. If someone had told me 3 years ago that the life I'm living now would come after losing everything I thought I needed, I would have laughed. Or cried. But the truth is, some losses clear the way for the life we are always meant to have. I used to believe love had to be hard, dramatic, and painful, that if someone didn't come running after you in the rain, it wasn't real. I thought sacrifices meant silence, that compromise meant shrinking. I thought being a wife meant being less of myself so someone else could shine brighter. But I was wrong. Real love doesn't ask you to disappear. It asks you to stand fully in your truth and invite someone else to do the same. Derek didn't ruin my life, he revealed it. He exposed the cracks I had ignored, the expectations I had bent over backward to meet. He taught me painfully and thoroughly what it looks like when someone values control over connection. And for that, oddly enough, I'm grateful. Because without that collapse, I wouldn't have built this. this calm, spacious, honest life. A life where I know my worth without someone needing to confirm it. A life where I wake up each morning not wondering if I'm loved, but knowing I love myself. And more than that, I trust myself. That's the biggest shift of all. I no longer question my instincts. I don't dismiss the red flags. I don't wait until the silence becomes deafening. I act. I speak. I choose. To the women reading this who are still in the thick of it, waiting by the phone, blaming yourselves for someone else's withdrawal, shrinking yourself to fit a role that was never meant for you, I see you. And I promise it's not the end, it's the beginning. You don't need to be perfect to start over. You don't need a detailed plan, a Pinterest-worthy apartment, or a new relationship to validate your worth. All you need is a willingness to face the truth and a little courage to make one small change at a time. When I finally stopped asking, why did this happen to me, and started asking, what can I build from here, everything shifted. I stopped performing and started living. I started reading poetry again, painting without worrying if it was any good, calling old friends and telling them I missed them, sitting with my own thoughts without flinching, saying no without guilt, saying yes without fear. It wasn't glamorous. There were nights I cried, mornings I questioned everything, but over time I realized I didn't want my old life back. I wanted more. More depth, more honesty, more presence. And that's exactly what I gave myself. Matt was part of that journey, yes, but he wasn't the destination. He didn't rescue me. I had already rescued myself. That's what made our connection real. It was two whole people choosing to walk beside each other, not leaning on each other to stand. If this story leaves you with anything, let it be this. You are allowed to begin again. Not because you failed, not because you're broken, but because your story deserves a new chapter, one where you are the author, not the afterthought. I don't know what the rest of my life will look like, but I know who I am now. And that truth, that grounded, quiet truth, is more powerful than any vow, title, or certificate. It's mine, and it's enough.